The first thing I want to tackle in general is a pretty bold claim, I think. Psychology is not a science. Once you think of some of the other scientific fields, neuroscience, biology, astronomy, mathematics, think of the degree of accuracy and the sort of standards required for something to be of a scientific standard in those fields. Neuroscience has brain scans and measurements of chemical balances in the brain. Or medicine, you actually cut corpses apart and measure things and learn how the whole body works. And if you give someone the wrong medicine, they die. Like, it has to be really accurate. Astronomy, they can calculate when a meteor is going to hit a planet and where the moon's going to be in any given time using pure mathematics. If they get it wrong, it's really obvious, and they have a lot of people with the same skill set watching over each other to make sure they get it right. Psychology claims to be a science and yet falls far below the standards of other scientific fields. So recently on social media, somebody posted, I think it was an article from The Independent, and the headline was something like 1/3 of college men would rape a woman if they thought they could get away with it. And they cited a study. So I went and had a look at the study. First and foremost, the study didn't find that at all. Secondly, and most importantly, the study had only 86 participants, right? A study with only 86 people, all of them men from the exact same college. So somebody's taken that sample and made a grand claim about humans in general from a sample size that's probably smaller than the amount of people who were in the supermarket the last time you were there. And all they did was a self-report questionnaire asking people if they knew the difference between coercion and force and rape. So 86 college students, of which about a third didn't know the difference between the words coercion and rape in terms of definition. That's all that study found, assuming they're even reporting the results accurately. A study like that is garbage. It's worthless. Scientifically speaking, it tells us nothing of value, nothing valid, nothing reliable. And this is the problem with psychology as a so-called science. A lot of the published studies that somehow make it past peer review are garbage. For a start, most of the participants are college students because they're about the only people they can find for their studies. Secondly, most of the information is gathered through self-report. That is, you ask someone or give them a questionnaire and they give you the answers about themselves with no third-party observation whatsoever. So they are just telling you what they think they are, which is never going to be accurate. And thirdly, there is literally like no funding for replicating studies. So one of the key elements to science, in case you're not aware, is some scientist puts out a study, claims this, another scientist repeats that study to see if they get the same results. Hopefully this happens multiple times, dozens of times, preferably. And if they all end up getting the same results, then they can say, look, we've all tried to break this thing and we couldn't break it. It must be true. But psychology, they pump out dozens of studies per day that get published. And yet almost none of them get replicated. Almost nobody comes back and says, wait, is this bullshit? Let me try it. And if that wasn't enough of a problem, have you ever actually looked into the methodology of a lot of these so-called experiments? They're bizarre. They're like nothing to do with real life whatsoever. With astronomy, medicine, mathematics, neuroscience, they have to work with real life situations. Neuroscience works with a real brain that has real damage. Medicine will actually give someone a medication and see if it works, or perform a surgery to see how they function afterwards. In psychology, the so-called experiments are usually this bizarre laboratory environment where people are usually brought into like a classroom type situation and given a weird test or activity to do that's supposed to represent something psychologically, and then grand assumptions are made about how that represents real life. For example, Dan Ariely, who's later been challenged for his work being corrupt, is one of the only people I know who so-called studies honesty. And he'll bring people into an environment where they have to do a test and then they might say, have to self-report on how well they did on the test, and they'll get paid if they got good results. And he says, this shows that people are corrupt, like if they're not being checked. And yet nobody ever has to do that. Nobody ever goes and does an exam and then gets paid for reporting on their results. That's not a real life situation. So we can't say that that reflects what will happen in real life. And this is so often the case in the methodology of psychology studies, is the way they got their results is something that doesn't happen in real life and doesn't take into account all the variables of real life. I mean, even in other scientific disciplines, they have this problem. Game theory and mathematics, for example, talks about how people will cooperate or undermine each other, so on, depending on their goals and motives. But even that requires humans to be consistent. And that's one thing we're not, is consistent, right? So people change their mind for all sorts of reasons. And that isn't taken into account when you do the mathematical equations for game theory. So psychology is even less rigorous than mathematics. So psychology is essentially just crap. It's mysticism. It's astrology. It's like you take Myers-Briggs, for example. A lot of people believe in Myers-Briggs. You know, they say, I'm an INFJ. It's garbage. It doesn't mean anything. That's not scientific. It's essentially closer to tarot cards or astrology than it is to, say, medicine or mathematics. You know who really understands psychology? The people who have to apply it successfully in real life. This is not clinical psychologists having a therapy session with someone on a couch and using a textbook to describe how that person should be treated. Con artists are good at psychology. CEOs and politicians are good at psychology. Gang leaders, marketers, and advertisers, they're good at psychology. Seductionists, those who are promiscuous or very socially popular, actors, right? Psychopaths, and coaches, or people who the results have to work. That's one thing I learned as a probation officer, is I just came fresh from a psychology degree where I had all the like book learning, and then I had a real person sat in front of me, and it's like I have to throw the book away because it doesn't work on this guy. Because he has all these exceptions and all these variables that the book can't calculate for. The book can say this guy has borderline personality, but I can't say, but if he also has this and that and is addicted to that and has a bad relationship with him, this changes things. The book can't say that. I have to figure that out for myself. And there's so many nuances and variables to every individual that their diagnoses are actually really unhelpful in the end. It's better off that I start fresh with a blank page and go, how does this guy work? What actually works with this guy? What gets the best results with this guy? And I'd get there quicker with a blank page than I would having to start with a textbook and then undo what the textbook's telling me to do. The lesson I want to get across here is that if you really want to understand other humans and you want to understand human psychology, both other people's and your own, you got to go out there and do it in real life with trial and error experimentation, guided by some theoretical knowledge. But applied psychology is how you learn. You want to get good at sales? Go and sell something 1,000 times and make notes and make adjustments according to the results you get. If you want to learn how to connect well with people, you don't read a psychology textbook on, attachment theory. You actually go and try to connect with people, try lots of different things, and then you use the textbook to kind of make some adjustments as to what might be working and what might not be working, and so on. But it should be practical first and theory second, not the other way around, if you want to make progress. Just on a personal note, I really want to put it out there, like, I think it's abhorrent how inaccurate the field of psychology is in general. There's a lot of corruption in the studies. I've been a study research assistant myself, and I was literally told to corrupt the data in order to match the hypothesis. It's easy to do that in psychology because no one's going to check the methodology, no one's going to replicate the study. You can make up whatever fucking shit you want, and it'll probably get past the peer review board. Whereas if you do it in mathematics or chemistry, all these geniuses are going to look at your work and go, wait, that's bullshit. They can just look at it and know it's wrong, and they'll go prove you wrong straight away with a calculator. Whereas in psychology, you can come up with something and people will be like, yeah, it sounds politically correct, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Plus, there's no funding to do anything about it anyway. I believe neuroscience is a science, and the closest we'll get to a science about how humans are is neuroscience. All right. Anything else, anything that goes under the umbrella of psychology, hold on to it very gently. There's a good chance it's either inaccurate or you can't apply it in real life, so it's pointless.